well, net zero and carbon capture, perhaps another aspect of the smart city?
Almost certainly, but we must be questioning the word smart by now. Yes, the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero announcing with great pride that they've pledged £22 billion into what's called carbon capture. And we have referred to it on the news before, but essentially it's the idea that by putting carbon dioxide underground, you may expect the temperature of the whole world to change. So they say that they're launching a new clean energy industry. Obviously, this is via Twitter, where else? They say that they're tackling climate change, and there are a couple of projects going live on Merseyside and Teesside. CCUS, carbon capture, utilization and storage technology, removes CO2 emissions before it reaches the atmosphere and stores it safely beneath the seabed using tried and tested technology that's been deployed for over 20 years. Now, stores it safely is underlined, and I will come back to explaining why that is in a second. Here's a diagram showing an oil drilling platform and then something onshore, which of course would be creating lots of carbon dioxide, which is why when they say that CCS, carbon capture and storage, is critical to the UK achieving net zero, the government aims to capture and store 20 to 30 million tonnes of carbon dioxide by 2030 and then 50 million by 2035. These figures are obviously largely irrelevant because so far no target on carbon capture has ever been met. But nonetheless, what is clear is that even attempting to do this costs an awful lot of money. It refers to a variety of processes, and they capture and store carbon dioxide emissions, generally from industrial processes. This carbon dioxide can then be transported, including via repurposed gas pipelines, and stored, for example, within rock formations in the UKCS. My apologies, I can't remember what CS stands for, but I think it must be something to do with the seabed, including depleted oil and gas reservoirs. Now, the reason I've highlighted industrial processes, what they really mean are petrochemical plants onshore, and then pumping the carbon dioxide that they're producing away and back under the seabed, including depleted oil and gas reservoirs. It's even been suggested that carbon dioxide could be used as a flushing agent with which to push out oil and gas. So in actual fact, this has absolutely nothing to do with reducing carbon dioxide content, but all to do with furthering the interests of the petrochemical industry. Going back to safety, here an article from The National talking about a pipe explosion, raising fears about Scottish carbon capture plans. This was in February 2020 in Satartia in Mississippi, where 50 people were hospitalized, foaming at the mouth, unconscious after being poisoned by a carbon dioxide leak. And then we had another example more recently in interestingly named town of Sulphur in Louisiana, where effectively the same thing happened. So the incredible irony, of course, in suggesting that carbon dioxide is dangerous when it isn't, they then concentrate it to the point where it does become an asphyxiant and intoxicant and is then ready to harm anybody in the vicinity should there be a leak. But of course, we now have to examine the incredible arrogance of the climate science body and indeed the complete ignorance of any unintended consequences. The Scientific American asked several years ago, does rising carbon dioxide benefit plants? Effectively asking the question, if carbon dioxide levels are increasing and they cannot be attributed to man, is this because there is a requirement for more carbon dioxide in order to stimulate plant growth because we are bashing so many plants down? A scientist there, Richard Norby, said you can't just look at carbon dioxide because the overall context really matters. Well, that seems to be a lesson not learned as we continue to look only at carbon dioxide. We go on to see why these things happen, and in particular concerning lobbying. And back in January of this year, the then Green Party MP, Caroline Lucas, drew attention to this by saying, in spring 2023, OE UK board members of Harbour Energy and Equinor met with Treasury officials. The minutes secured by a Freedom of Information request state that the Equinor reps smiled at the government's reassurances. Yes, I am sure they did. And indeed, she's quite right. When we look at Transparency International's very good database of the lobbying of government at openaccess.transparency.org, you're able to look up very readily how many engagements have taken place between industry and government, and it is an awful lot. And I'll just round off by saying that this really is a good business to be in. On the government's contract finder at the minute, there is a £4.4 million contract for an organisation who will write the policy on standards and methodologies of greenhouse gas removals. So effectively, with this technology, there's no need for it to work or for it to make any sense, but there is an awful lot of money in it.
Yes, indeed, there is. Thank you very much, Charles. Well, that brings us to the end of today's program. Thanks to Charles and Vanessa for joining. Thank you all for watching. As Charles mentioned, we'll be having a slightly interesting conversation about automation in cars in Extra in a few minutes' time. But do join us for that if you're a UK column member. Otherwise, don't forget the interview with Chris Coverdale at 1 p.m. tomorrow, and we'll see you at 1 p.m. as usual on Friday for another news program. See you then. Bye-bye.